I want you to take a second and just look around your immediate environment. Like, really look at the objects you take for granted every single day.
Yeah, the things hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you're holding your mobile phone right now, so look at the screen. Or look at that waterproof rain jacket hanging by the door.
Or even the yoga pants you might be wearing.
Right, or the smudge-proof makeup sitting on your bathroom counter. You probably wouldn't think a smartphone, a raincoat, and mascara have anything in common.
But they absolutely do.
They do. They share a hidden, practically indestructible ingredient. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the source material on the era of forever chemicals.
Right, a category of materials known scientifically as PFAS.
Exactly. And the mission of this deep dive is to figure out what these chemicals actually are, how they manage to quietly conquer the entire globe, the hidden toll they're taking on human biology, and
And this slightly terrifying cutting-edge science racing to destroy a molecule that was literally engineered to be indestructible.
yes. But it's a massive undertaking to wrap our heads around this, because to understand the global scale, we really first have to zoom all the way in on the chemistry.
We do. And simply put, PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are synthetic organofluorine chemical compounds.
Okay, that sounds like a mouthful.
It is, but at their core, they just consist of an alkyl chain, which is essentially a backbone made of carbon atoms. But the crucial part is that this carbon backbone is surrounded by multiple fluorine atoms.
Let me try to visualize that.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm picturing this molecule, it's like a long spine made of carbon, and it's wrapped completely in this tight armor of fluorine atoms.
That armor analogy is highly accurate. What's fascinating here is the specific nature of the carbon-fluorine bond. It is one of the strongest bonds in all of organic chemistry.
Because fluorine is so reactive.
Right. Fluorine is a highly electronegative element. That means it aggressively pulls electrons toward itself.
Oh, I see.
So when it bonds with carbon, it hugs those shared electrons incredibly tightly. That creates a dense, impenetrable electromagnetic shield around that carbon backbone.
Wow.
And because of that unnatural stability, these chemicals are virtually immune to heat, oil, grease, stains, and water. They simply refuse to interact with other molecules or break apart under normal physical stress.
Which perfectly explains why they are the magic ingredient in everything from nonstick food packaging to, industrial firefighting foam to the insulation on electrical wire.
Exactly. It's an engineer's dream.
It sounds like brilliant engineering until you pull the camera back and look at the consequences of making a material that never degrades. And we've been pumping this stuff out for a long time.
We really have.
I mean, the widespread use actually began way back in 1938 with the invention of Teflon. But the detail in the research that completely stopped me in my tracks is the sheer volume of variations we've created since then.
It's staggering.
It is. We say forever chemicals like it's a single bad actor, maybe two. But the ETSA database currently lists over 14,000 unique PFAS compounds.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, because if you look at the PubChem database, they log a mind-boggling 7 million unique chemicals within this broader group.
The variation seems endless because that foundational carbon-fluorine bond can be attached to thousands of different functional groups to create different industrial properties.
Okay, that makes sense.
But regardless of whether a specific compound is designed to make a paper bowl grease-proof or make a microchip resistant to heat, they all share that defining, stubborn characteristic.
Which is absolute persistence in the environment. Okay, let's unpack this, because if these carbon-fluorine bonds don't naturally break down under any normal circumstances, what is actually happening when you wash those yoga pants in the laundry?
Or when you finally throw away that badly scratched nonstick frying pan.
Exactly. We are taking these indestructible molecules from our consumer products and injecting them directly into the planetary ecosystem.
We are. And for decades, the prevailing assumption among environmental scientists was that the ocean would act as the ultimate harmless sink.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind.
The thought process was that these chemicals would wash down our drains, flow into the rivers, and eventually end up in the deep ocean where they would just dilute over centuries.
Which sounds reasonable enough.
It did, but a breakthrough 2021 field study by researchers at Stockholm University completely dismantled that assumption. They proved that PFAS do not stay trapped in the water.
Wait, really? Gravity pulls things down.
Yeah.
How does a heavy synthetic chemical just decide to jump out of the ocean and back into the atmosphere?
It comes down to the mechanics of sea spray. When ocean waves crash, they trap air and create millions of microscopic bubbles underwater.
Okay.
Because many of these PFAS molecules have a hydrophobic tail, meaning they physically repel water, they migrate and stick to the surface of those air bubbles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when those bubbles rise to the surface of the ocean and burst, they act like microscopic catapults. They launch the chemicals out of the water and into the air as sea spray aerosols.
So the ocean is literally rejecting the pollution and physically launching it back into the wind.
Yes. And once those chemical aerosols are airborne, they catch the atmospheric currents, travel vast global distances, and eventually condense and come back down as rain.
That is wild.
It creates a continuous, endless planetary cycle. In fact, by 2022, studies tracking this phenomenon found that the levels of at least 4 major PFAS compounds in rainwater, everywhere on the globe, greatly exceeded the EPA's lifetime drinking water health advisories.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. We have effectively crossed a planetary boundary for chemical pollution. The rain falling from the sky is now a delivery mechanism.
So it's not like a localized oil spill that we can just try to mop up. It's more like a planetary circulatory system. The Earth is constantly sweating and raining out these chemicals, effectively recycling the pollution everywhere all at once.
The circulatory system analogy captures the severity of the situation perfectly. And it's not just the ocean and the weather acting as the bloodstream.
What else is there?
It is the biology of the planet itself. Migrating seabirds are now acting as toxic vectors.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. A bird might feed in heavily polluted southern industrial waters, accumulate these chemicals in its tissues, and then fly thousands of miles north.
Carrying it with them.
Exactly. They are transporting PFAS directly into the otherwise pristine Arctic environment. And when those birds become prey, the chemicals are injected right into the top of the Arctic food chain.
Which introduces another concept from the data that feels like something out of a horror movie, which is biomagnification.
Right. So bioaccumulation is when a single organism, say a bug, absorbs a chemical faster than its body can clear it out.
Okay.
But biomagnification is what happens when you zoom out to the entire food web. Because PFAS compounds bind tightly to proteins in blood and liver tissue, they don't get flushed out of an animal system.
So it just builds up.
Exactly. So an aquatic insect absorbs a tiny amount of PFAS from the river water. Then, a small fish eats hundreds of those insects, absorbing all of their combined toxic load.
And then a bigger fish eats the small fish.
Right. A larger predatory fish eats dozens of those small fish. At every single step up the food chain, the concentration of the chemical multiplies exponentially.
And the actual math on that multiplier effect is staggering. Looking at a 2023 U.S. study on freshwater fish collected by the EPA, the concentrations of these chemicals in the biological tissue, the biota, can be 5,000 times greater than the concentration in the surrounding water.
It's a massive magnification.
It is. They noted that eating just a single serving of locally caught freshwater fish can significantly spike the levels of a compound called PFOS in your own bloodstream.
Which forces us to look in the mirror. If the planet is circulating these chemicals like a giant bloodstream, what happens when they begin to accumulate heavily in human blood?
Right.
We cross the line from an abstract environmental crisis to a very intimate, direct human health crisis.
So let's talk about the human body then.
Right.
Because if I eat that piece of fish, or if our listener drinks a glass of tap water today, how long do those specific molecules actually stick around inside us? Does our stomach acid even make a dent in them?
Human stomach acid is incredibly weak compared to the carbon-fluorine bond. The human body simply does not possess the biological machinery, the enzymes, or the acids required to break that chemical armor.
So it just stays there.
Instead, these chemicals take up residence. They have a half-life of over 8 years in the human body.
Over 8 years. So the chemical coating from a fast food wrapper I ate in 2018 is potentially still circulating in my blood right now.
That is the reality. Because they bind to our blood proteins, they are only very, very slowly cleared out through urine.
Wow.
And that lengthy residence time means they accumulate year after year to levels where they begin to trigger serious biological misfires.
And the data on those misfires is grim. A 2023 report by the Mount Sinai School of Medicine linked high exposure to PFAS to a 40% decrease in a woman's ability to have a successful pregnancy.
It's a very significant drop.
It also pointed to severe hormone disruption and delayed puberty onset.
The developmental impacts are particularly profound because fetuses and young children are undergoing rapid cellular growth, making them highly vulnerable to endocrine disruptors.
That makes sense.
And these chemicals can transfer directly from mother to infant via breastfeeding, which has been linked to lower birth weights and even a decreased immune response to standard childhood vaccines.
That is so concerning.
But the disruption goes even deeper than hormones. PFAS actually alters our foundational immune and inflammatory responses at a cellular level.
I really want to dig into that because the mechanism behind how PFAS triggers ulcerative colitis was fascinating. I always assumed chemical exposure just caused direct physical damage, like an acid burning a hole in the stomach lining.
Right, like a caustic burn.
Yeah, but it's much sneakier than that. It essentially hacks the immune system.
It is a brilliant, though destructive, biological hack. High levels of PFAS, specifically the compounds PFOA and PFOS, actively shift the gut's immune response.
Okay, how so?
Well, in a healthy gut, your immune system maintains a careful balance to keep harmful bacteria in check. But PFAS promotes the overproduction of what are called anti-inflammatory M2 macrophages.
So it forces the immune system to stand down and stop fighting.
In a targeted way, yes.
Right.
By artificially suppressing the normal immune defense in the intestinal tissue, it rolls out the red carpet for a specific type of sulfate-reducing bacteria.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Normally, your body keeps these bacteria under control, but with the immune system suppressed by the PFAS, these bacteria flourish and multiply wildly.
And what do?
As they consume sulfates, they produce elevated levels of hydrogen sulfide gas. It is that hydrogen sulfide gas that literally dissolves and breaks down the colonic epithelial barrier, the lining of your colon, resulting in ulcerative colitis.
Oh my God.
It is a complex, cascading biological failure entirely initiated by the presence of a synthetic molecule.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
It's using our own gut bacteria as a weapon against us. And beyond the gut, the research links heavy PFAS exposure to a whole host of other systemic issues.
Yes, there's quite a list.
Like thyroid disease, high cholesterol, severe liver injury, and several types of cancers, including kidney and testicular cancer. Which logically makes me wonder about the people who are facing the absolute highest levels of daily exposure, the occupational front lines.
Historically, our understanding of these severe health impacts came from medical surveillance of the workers at fluorochemical manufacturing plants, starting all the way back in the 1940s.
Right.
The blood serum levels of those factory workers were sometimes tens of thousands of times higher than the general population. But the front lines of exposure have expanded drastically today. Firefighters, for instance, are absorbing massive toxic loads.
I saw that specifically regarding Class B firefighting foam.
Aqueous film-forming foam. It is designed specifically to fight liquid fuel fires, like an airplane crash or an oil refinery fire.
Because water wouldn't work on a fuel fire.
Exactly. The PFAS in the foam allows it to spread rapidly across the surface of the liquid fuel and withstand extreme heat to smother the flames.
But the trade-off is huge.
Right, because firefighters are physically covered in this foam, and they are also absorbing PFAS through the flame-resistant chemical coatings on their protective gear. We also see tremendous tragic exposure levels among 9/11 first responders.
Through the dust.
Yes. When the World Trade Center towers collapsed, the pulverized dust and smoke contained massive concentrations of PFAS from the stain-resistant coatings that were used on acres of carpets and thousands of pieces of furniture inside those offices.
I mean, I completely understand the risk for emergency responders and chemical workers, but there was one occupation listed in the data that I had to read 3 times. It seems so out of place.
The ski technicians.
Yes, a professional ski wax technician. I would have assumed the highest exposure risk was exclusively for chemical plant workers. But you're telling me a professional ski wax technician, just from breathing in the fumes of heated glide wax, is facing some of the highest total PFAS air concentrations recorded.
It sounds absurd until you look at the physics of the job. The high-performance glide wax applied to the bottom of professional skis is packed with PFAS to drastically reduce friction against the snow.
Okay.
During the application process, technicians use a hot iron to melt and bond the wax to the ski,
So they're vaporizing the chemicals?
vaporizing them in entirely unventilated spaces. The heat of the iron releases dense fumes and airborne particles filled with perfluoroalkyl acids.
That's awful.
Because these technicians are often working in small, enclosed trailers or basement tuning rooms, leaning directly over the workbench, they are inhaling vaporized forever chemicals straight into their lung tissue hour after hour.
Breathing in vaporized Teflon to shave 1/10 of a second off a ski race.
Yeah.
When you lay out the health effects, the global contamination, the rainwater, it brings up a massive, unavoidable question about the economics of this crisis. How long have the manufacturers known? What kind of money is keeping this industry alive? And who is ultimately paying the bill for the fallout?
Looking at the historical context available, the major chemical producers, companies like DuPont and 3M, were aware of the baseline toxicity decades ago.
Really? Decades ago?
Internal documents and studies reveal they knew as early as the 1970s that these substances were, quote, highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested. Yet, instead of pulling back, global production expanded exponentially.
Let's talk about the math behind that expansion, because
Yeah.
the numbers are almost hard to process. The PFAS market generated $28 billion in revenue in 2023 alone.
Right.
And that resulted in about a $4 billion net profit for the chemical industry. But contrast that $4 billion profit with the estimated societal cost. An organization called ChemSec ran the numbers on the global costs for healthcare treatments, soil remediation, and municipal water filtration.
And what did they find?
They estimate the global cost to be $17.5 trillion annually. And a separate January 2025 report stated that cleaning up toxic PFAS pollution just in the UK and Europe could easily top 1.6 trillion pounds over the next 20 years.
It is a staggering economic disparity. The vast majority of the profits are localized and captured by a handful of multinational corporations, while the external costs, the cancer treatments, the specialized water treatment plants, are distributed globally across public healthcare systems and local taxpayers.
If the industry profits $4 billion a year, but the global cleanup and healthcare cost is $17.5 trillion, the math doesn't just look unbalanced, it looks fundamentally broken. How do international regulators even begin to address a mathematical gap that wide?
Well, it is arguably one of the most complex regulatory challenges in modern history, and the global response is deeply fractured. We are seeing movement, though.
Like what?
The European Union is actively developing a comprehensive action plan to eliminate all non-essential uses of PFAS. In 2023, 3M agreed to pay a $10.3 billion settlement regarding municipal water contamination in the U.S.
Wow, $10.3 billion.
Yeah. And the United Nations has even listed several specific PFAS chemicals as persistent organic pollutants under the Stockholm Convention. However, major global producers and industrial users, including the United States, Israel, and Malaysia, have not ratified that specific UN agreement.
Why did Wood? If the math is that bad, why wouldn't every country immediately sign on to ban them?
Because completely phasing them out isn't just a matter of banning a single toxic pesticide. PFAS are baked into the foundation of the 21st century economy.
Oh, because of all the tech applications.
Exactly. They are critical components in manufacturing semiconductor microchips, lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles, and highly specialized medical devices like artificial heart valves.
Right.
Regulators are caught in a logjam. I mean, how do you ban a chemical that is poisoning the rainwater when doing so might simultaneously cripple the clean energy transition and global supply chains?
And while wealthy nations argue over supply chains and slowly plot out phase-outs, there is a massive, silent, global inequality gap hiding in the background.
There really is.
We manufacture and consume the bulk of these chemicals in the developed world. But the planetary circulatory system we talked about earlier, the ocean spray, the atmospheric winds, the migrating birds doesn't check passports. The pollution migrates to developing nations, and they're essentially getting hit blindly.
The technological barrier for developing nations is immense. You cannot manage a pollutant if you cannot measure it.
And testing for this is hard, right?
Very. Testing for trace amounts of PFAS in local water supplies and agricultural soil requires highly sophisticated equipment, specifically liquid chromatography mass spectrometry machines.
That sounds expensive.
Extremely. These cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy and operate, which many regions simply do not have the budget for. If you cannot detect the contamination, you cannot track the source or treat the water.
And the tragic downstream effect is that when that invisible contamination eventually leads to spikes in thyroid disease or ulcerative colitis in those populations, they often lack the robust healthcare infrastructure required to treat those long-term chronic diseases. We have effectively shifted a toxic burden onto the populations least equipped to handle it.
Which brings us to the most urgent, high-stakes area of scientific research happening today, which is remediation. Given the trillions of dollars in damage and the severe biological toll, how do we actually clean our water? How do we destroy a bond that nature itself cannot break?
This is the part that feels like pure science fiction. Because a standard Brita filter isn't going to save us here, right?
No, traditional water filters like activated carbon can successfully capture and trap PFAS molecules, but they do not destroy them. You are simply moving the problem.
Right, you're just concentrating it.
Exactly. You take dirty water, run it through a carbon, and now you have clean water and a highly toxic concentrated filter that eventually has to be thrown into a landfill, where the chemicals will just leach right back into the groundwater.
So what's the alternative?
To actually destroy the molecule, scientists have to deploy extreme physics. One leading method is a process called supercritical water oxidation.
Supercritical water. That sounds like something from a nuclear reactor.
It essentially utilizes a fourth state of matter. Engineers take contaminated water, mix in oxidizing substances, and heat it above 374 degrees Celsius while simultaneously subjecting it to more than 220 bars of crushing pressure.
So they are boiling it and crushing it at the exact same time.
Yes. At that precise thermodynamic intersection, the water enters a supercritical state. It behaves neither like a standard liquid nor a standard gas, but rather a highly reactive fluid.
That is wild.
In this chaotic, extreme energy environment, the indestructible carbon-fluorine bonds are physically torn apart.
Huh.
The process successfully dissolves and destroys 99% of the forever chemicals present.
That's incredible. Are there other extreme methods?
Yes. Another fascinating method relying on extreme physics is electrochemical oxidation. Researchers are utilizing specialized boron-doped diamond electrodes.
Wait, they're using diamonds to clean the water?
Synthetic diamonds infused with boron, yes. They submerge these electrodes into the contaminated water and pass a high-voltage electric current through them.
And what does that do?
The electrochemical reaction generated at the surface of the diamond is powerful enough to act like molecular scissors, literally snapping the carbon-fluorine bonds and leaving fresh, uncontaminated water behind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So we are essentially throwing the kitchen sink at this problem. On one end, we're using supercritical water and diamond electrodes that sound like sci-fi laser weapons. And on the other end, we're building high-tech swamps to let plants and microbes chew on the water.
The high-tech swamp is an excellent way to describe constructed wetlands, which are emerging as a brilliant, low-cost alternative.
Because the diamonds must be expensive.
Exactly. Pumping water through diamond electrodes uses massive amounts of electricity, which isn't scalable for an entire city's water supply. So instead, environmental engineers are building saturated environments that mimic natural wetlands.
Using plants.
Yes, they plant specific vegetation with high root surface areas and high protein content like water hyacinths. Because the PFAS molecules bind to proteins, the roots of the plants physically draw the chemicals up and out of the water.
But the plants themselves don't destroy the chemical, do they?
No.
Now you just have a toxic swamp full of toxic plants that you have to harvest and deal with.
If it were just the plants, yes. But the mechanism goes a step further into microbiology. Researchers discovered that if they engineered the soil of the wetland by introducing a mix of gravel and magnetite, an iron-rich mineral, it supercharges a very specific type of microbe.
A microbe that eats PFAS.
There is a bacterium known as Acidomicrobium strain A6. When this specific microbe is placed in these engineered iron-rich environments, it undergoes a biological reaction that allows it to essentially eat the pollution.
Oh, wow.
It has the biological capability to actually strip the fluorine atoms right off the central carbon chain, defanging the forever chemical.
It is incredible to think about. We engineered a molecular mistake so severe that it contaminated the entire globe, and we are now relying on microscopic soil bacteria to undo it for us.
It's quite ironic.
Oh, we also have to mention foam fractionation, because it is such a clever, brutally simple mechanical solution compared to the diamonds and the microbes.
Yes, it really is.
We talked earlier about how the tail of the PFAS molecule is hydrophobic. It hates water. So engineers just take large vats of contaminated water and pump rising air bubbles through it from the bottom.
Right.
The chemicals desperately want to escape the water, so they cling to the rising air bubbles, float up to the top, and form a dense foam. Then you literally just skim the hyper-concentrated toxic foam right off the surface, leaving the clean water behind.
It is a perfect example of judo using the chemical's own defensive properties against it.
So let's take a step back and look at the massive journey we've just been on. We started with the waterproof coating on the jacket, hanging in your closet. We watch those chemicals wash down the drain, get launched out of the crashing ocean via sea spray, ride the atmospheric winds, and rain down onto the pristine Arctic tundra.
Yeah.
We traced how they magnify thousands of times over as they move up the food chain, find their way into the human bloodstream where they linger for nearly a decade, hacking our immune systems. And finally, we looked at the electrified diamonds and the engineered iron-eating bacteria trying to pull them back out of our water supply.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire story of PFAS is a profound cautionary lesson in the unforeseen consequences of technological progress.
It really is.
We engineered a chemical bond so utterly perfect that nature couldn't break it down. But we did it without ever pausing to consider what happens when you introduce a permanent, immortal material into a biological ecosystem that is entirely built on a delicate cycle of constant recycling and decay.
And it is a story that you, the listener, physically interact with every single day. The smudge-proof coating on your phone screen, the fibers in your clothes, the non-stick pan you cook your eggs in, they are all active participants in this global cycle.
They are everywhere.
The regulatory battles and the scientific choices being made by society right now, today, will dictate what the rain falling on your roof is going to look like decades from now. But I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to ponder on your own.
What's that?
If these forever chemicals truly do outlast us, and if they persist in the Earth's geological record indefinitely, millions of years from now, will alien explorers or future archaeologists use this indestructible microscopic layer of PFAS buried in our fossilized sediment as the definitive marker of the exact moment human civilization thought it had finally conquered nature? Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to take a magnifying glass to a single, seemingly random year. We're looking at 1726.
Right, and we are using strictly its Wikipedia page as our foundational source for this.
Yeah, exactly. Our goal is to unpack exactly 365 days of human history. We want to show you how dissecting just 1 year reveals a cross-section of a world in this massive, chaotic transition.
It really is a massive transition. You have this collision of absolute empires trying to consolidate power alongside the really unforgiving realities of global trade.
Not to mention the brilliant cultural milestones and, well, some bizarre instances of what you would absolutely recognize today as viral fake news.
Oh, the fake news of 1726 is wild. But before we even look at the events of that year, we have to look at the calendar itself, because the world back then was literally not on the same page.
Right, the whole calendar mismatch thing.
Exactly. If you were an English merchant sailing across the English Channel to France in January of 1726, the moment you stepped off the boat, you instantly leaped forward 11 days in time.
That is just, I mean, imagine trying to coordinate a modern global supply chain like that. Or even just scheduling a Zoom meeting when London thinks it's Tuesday the 4th and Paris insists it's Saturday the 15th.
It would be a nightmare. Great Britain and its colonies were still clinging to the old Julian calendar, while much of Europe had already adopted the Gregorian calendar.
And that 11-day gap is just the perfect lens for this era, you know? You have a world becoming deeply interconnected through trade, but completely fragmented in how it actually operates.
No, it creates this fascinating tension. The globe is shrinking, but the mechanisms to control it are incredibly fragile. And you see that fragility play out immediately at the very highest levels of government.
Because the major powers were frantically trying to modernize their authority, right?
Exactly. The old system of a king just, pointing a sword and demanding loyalty that was no longer enough to govern these sprawling, complex empires.
So let's look at how that played out in China. Because the Yongzheng emperor essentially unleashes his chief enforcer.
Yeah, the vice minister of punishments.
Right. He uses him to aggressively interrogate this mid-level official named Qin Deran. And this interrogation uncovers a massive conspiracy, revealing that the emperor's own brothers are actively plotting a coup to overthrow him.
And the fallout from that is swift and permanent. The emperor systematically strips his brothers of their royal status, removes them from the imperial clan, and just throws them in prison.
Wow.
Yeah, and one of those brothers, Yuntang, actually dies in captivity later that very same year in September.
It reads exactly like a modern corporate hostile takeover.
Yeah.
You have a ruthless CEO who suspects the board is moving against him, so he brings in his head of internal security.
Right, extracts the damning emails and purges the boardroom.
Exactly. Except in 1726, the boardroom is an empire, and being voted out literally means you lose your life.
That's a great analogy. And that impulse to centralize and secure power through, systematic bureaucracy that's happening simultaneously across the globe. Rulers are realizing they need institutional control, not just personal intimidation.
Like what was happening in Russia around the same time.
Yes. In February, Russia establishes the Supreme Privy Council. This wasn't just a fancy new title. It fundamentally shifted power away from the chaotic daily whims of the monarch and concentrated it into a formalized board of 6 highly influential advisors.
So they're building the machinery of the modern state.
Right.
And you can actually see the older, more personal methods of diplomacy failing in real time.
Oh, absolutely. Look at France's very first ambassador to Russia, Jacques de Camperdon. He aptly packs up and leaves in March.
Because he failed to set up a marriage, right?
Yeah, he had spent 4 years trying to arrange a marriage between King Louis XV and the Russian Empress's daughter, or secure a Franco-Russian alliance, and he just fails entirely. The classic royal arranged marriage falls totally flat against this new bureaucratic reality.
And while those old methods fail, new bureaucratic battle lines are being drawn all over Europe. You have the First Treaty of Vienna, which creates this Austro-Spanish alliance specifically aimed against Great Britain.
Meanwhile, back in France, King Louis XV is orchestrating his own executive purge. He brings back his former tutor, André Hercule de Fleury, to effectively run the government.
Fleury later becomes a cardinal, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. And his elevation forces the absolute banishment of the current prime minister, the Duke of Bourbon, along with the Duke's mistress.
Even in the Middle East, you see the political architecture of the modern world taking shape. Nader Shah recaptures the vital city of Mashhad.
Right, establishing dominance in Persia.
And concurrently, Mohammed bin Saud officially takes over as the head of the House of Saud. I mean, that lays the literal dynastic foundation for the modern nation of Saudi Arabia. Every major player is locking down their headquarters.
But building and defending those massive centralized institutions required an unimaginable amount of wealth. And the transition from these newly organized halls of power to the unforgiving frontier of global trade is, it's incredibly stark.
Because securing that wealth meant launching vast fleets into the ocean, which was still a largely untamable, highly lethal environment. The sheer scale of the maritime disasters in 1726 is just, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. In January, the Dutch East India Company sends out this heavily armed frigate called the Agdekerke. It leaves the Cape Colony in South Africa with a crew of 200 men.
And then what happens?
It sails into the Indian Ocean and simply vanishes. Not a single trace of it is ever found.
Completely swallowed by the sea, 200 people, just gone.
Yeah. And yet the fate of the Portuguese Navy galleon, the Santa Rosa, is somehow even more horrifying.
Oh, the gunpowder ship.
Yes. In September, this massive vessel is sailing off the coast of Recife, Brazil. Its cargo hold is packed with gunpowder, and the ship spontaneously explodes.
Out of 700 passengers and crew, only 7 people survive.
It's devastating. The records from the time note that the victims were either incinerated in the blast, drowned in the immediate aftermath, or, and this is truly grim, they were killed by sharks as the wreckage sank.
Wait, I'm stuck in the economics of this. If an empire's entire goal is accumulating wealth and projecting strength, how does losing a heavily armed frigate or a 700-person galleon full of gunpowder make any financial sense?
It's a valid question.
Weren't these expeditions just way too massive of a gamble? I mean, how did they justify that level of loss?
Well, you have to view it through the lens of early global venture capital. The European empires operated on this mercantilist mindset, where the upside of a successful voyage was so astronomically high that it essentially subsidized the catastrophic losses.
So the profit margins were just that massive.
Exactly. Spices, gold, sugar, textiles. They brought in such wealth that losing a ship, even one with 700 souls on board, was factored in as an acceptable cost of doing business. The ships were assets. The sailors were just expendable labor.
A completely dehumanized ledger.
Yeah, and that brings us to the darkest application of that ledger, the transatlantic slave trade. The calculation that human life was merely capital reached its absolute most horrific conclusion here.
Right. And as we look at the sources, they outline the brutal math of this enterprise. In March of 1726, the slave ship L'Aurore arrives in New Orleans.
Yes.
It brings 290 enslaved black Africans who had been captured in Gambia. The voyage took 90 days, and during that horrific passage, 60 of those human beings died.
It's just a stark, awful reality of the era.
Yeah.
And the European empires were fighting viciously to monopolize that exploitation.
Yeah, like what happened in West Africa, in the Kingdom of Ouida.
Right, in modern-day Benin. King Hafon grants Portuguese traders permission to build a fort in his capital, Savi. The Dutch West India Company sees their market share threatened, so they literally hire mercenaries to attack the new Portuguese fort.
And they tried to burn it down by throwing flaming spears over the fortress walls. I mean, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal, they're all ruthlessly competing, throwing flaming spears at each other just to control the flow of enslaved people.
It really forces us to confront a heavy contradiction. You know, we often refer to the 18th century as the dawn of the Enlightenment. It's supposed to be this era celebrating reason, individual liberty, philosophical advancement.
But that intellectual golden age was entirely funded by this systemic, calculated exploitation. The wealth that allowed European philosophers to sit in cafes and discuss human rights was generated by ships like the L'Aurore.
Exactly. And there is another massive contradiction here, too. These empires are projecting power across thousands of miles of wild ocean. They're throwing up forts in West Africa, mapping the Americas. But back in their own capitals, they are absolutely terrified of their own citizens.
Right, they can navigate the globe, but they panic at the thought of a dozen people gathering in a living room.
You're touching on the intense domestic anxiety of the era. The rulers knew that the same trade routes bringing in wealth were also bringing in radical new ideas. So they tried to draw rigid legal lines to enforce absolute homogeneity.
On the borders, they're redrawing the map through treaties. Like in South America, the Spanish established the settlement of Montevideo to block Portuguese expansion.
And in Chile, you have the Parliament of Negrete, which formally ends a bloody uprising by having the Spanish recognize the territorial rights of the indigenous Mapuche people.
Up in North America, the British province of New York and the Iroquois Confederacy sit down to amend the 1701 Nanfan Treaty. They're basically locking the French out of crucial hunting grounds.
But those external treaties are really just about securing the perimeter. The internal laws are where you see the state trying to micromanage daily life.
Give me an example of the internal laws.
Well, in January, Sweden adopts the Conventicle Act. This law explicitly outlawed any non-Lutheran religious meetings outside of official church services.
So no private prayer groups.
None. The Swedish crown was terrified of pietism, which was a movement emphasizing personal, private devotion. They feared that if people were allowed to interpret scripture in their own homes, they might soon start interpreting politics, and that leads to open rebellion.
The Holy Roman Empire took that micromanagement even further, didn't they? Emperor Charles VI issues a direct order legally limiting the number of Jewish people who can be recognized as householders.
Yes, part of the Familien's laws. It was a brutal demographic chokehold. The law dictated that only the eldest son of a Jewish family was legally permitted to marry and start a recognized household.
What happened to the other sons?
If you were a second or third son, you either remained unmarried, married secretly and illegally, or were forced into exile. It was a state-sponsored mechanism to artificially cap a minority population.
Which makes the reality on the streets seem even more absurd. While kings and emperors are trying to micromanage marriages and living room gatherings, the actual daily life of the public is chaotic, violent, and highly sensational.
Oh, definitely. It's like a modern true crime obsession playing out in the 1700s.
The Catherine Hayes case in London completely captivated the public. On March 2nd, a night watchman is simply walking his route by the River Thames and stumbles across a severed head.
Just lying there.
Yeah. It sparks this massive tabloid-style frenzy. Authorities eventually display the head on a pole in a churchyard, hoping someone will recognize it.
And it turns out to belong to the husband of Catherine Hayes. She and an accomplice had murdered and dismembered him. She was later convicted and executed for it.
And out in the colonies, you have the English-born pirate Nicholas Brown finally being tracked down and captured in Jamaica. It's just wild out there.
The public obsession with these gruesome stories served as a release valve, I think. Society was highly regulated by the state, but also deeply vulnerable to the whims of nature.
Like the massive earthquake in September that killed over 226 people in Palermo, Sicily.
Exactly. People are increasingly aware of a vast, dangerous world, so they sought out distraction.
And how do you cope when the world is that turbulent? You turn to art, to literature, and sometimes to sheer unbelievable gullibility. Because 1726 wasn't just a year of purges and pirates. It was an absolute explosion of culture and information.
We are really looking at a critical tipping point in how human beings consume ideas and art.
Look at Johann Sebastian Bach. He is having a wildly prolific year in Leipzig. In January alone, he leads the first performances of several complex church cantatas.
Right, BWV 16, 13, and 72.
Yeah, and later in October, he debuts BWV 56, which is notable because it's one of the very few works he explicitly labeled as a cantata himself. He is operating at the absolute height of his musical genius.
And while Bach is elevating music, the written word is moving faster and hitting harder than ever before. Satire becomes a really potent political weapon.
Jonathan Swift anonymously publishes a satirical novel in London called Gulliver's Travels, and it completely sells out its first print run within a week.
A week? In 1726, that's incredible.
People were just devouring this critique of human nature and political corruption. Meanwhile, another giant of the Enlightenment, Voltaire, begins his exile in England. So you have these vast intellectual arguments moving across borders.
The technological infrastructure for mass communication is scaling up remarkably, too. Over in China, they're printing the complete classics collection of ancient China.
That's the immense encyclopedia, right?
Thousands of volumes. And to produce it, they utilize copper-based movable type printing. The sheer logistical achievement of casting hundreds of thousands of individual copper characters reveals a society deeply committed to preserving and mass distributing knowledge.
It's the democratization of information.
Yeah.
But there is a massive catch to that.
There always is.
When you build the infrastructure for mass communication, you also build the infrastructure for mass gullibility. Which brings us to the absolute wildest event of 1726.
I knew we were going to get here.
In November, an Englishwoman named Mary Toft captures the attention of the entire nation, including prominent doctors and the royal court. Why? Because she allegedly gives birth to 16 rabbits.
A medical impossibility that gripped the highest levels of British society before finally being exposed as an elaborate hoax.
Wait, how did she even pull that off?
Well, she had been manually inserting animal parts to fool the physicians. It was completely fabricated.
I cannot get over the irony here. In the exact same year that human genius is producing Bach's intricate cantatas, mapping the globe, and printing monumental copper-type encyclopedias, the educated public is completely willing to believe that a woman just birthed a litter of rabbits.
It's so bizarre.
It is the 18th century equivalent of a viral internet rumor spreading on WhatsApp or Twitter.
But it makes sense if you think about it. A printing press, or a rapid postal network, does not care about the truth. It doesn't differentiate between a masterpiece of philosophical satire like Gulliver's Travels and a completely fabricated tabloid story about rabbit births.
So the speed of information increased exponentially in 1726. But human psychology, our appetite for the bizarre and the sensational, remained exactly the same.
Exactly.
Well, we started this deep dive by pulling one single year out of a hat and looking only at its Wikipedia page. And we didn't just find a dry list of dates. We found a deeply interconnected web.
Yeah, the connections are everywhere once you look closely.
The ruthless bureaucratic purges in the Chinese and French courts, the venture capital gamble of galleons exploding in the Atlantic, the horrific commodification of human life on slave ships arriving in Louisiana.
And the soaring genius of Bach in Leipzig, right alongside the bizarre viral hoaxes in England. They are all driving the same transition.
We are watching the blueprints of the modern world being drawn. The rulers of 1726 built the bureaucratic states we live in. The trade networks established the globalized economy we rely on. And the printing presses laid the groundwork for our modern media ecosystem.
We tend to look around at our lives today and think that globalization, complex international alliances, or the chaos of viral media are purely modern phenomena.
Right, but 1726 proves that these forces have been shaping human behavior for centuries. We're just playing out the same patterns with faster technology.
The tools change. We trade copper movable type for fiber optic cables and wooden frigates for cargo planes. But the underlying human drives for absolute power, for staggering wealth, for domestic control, and for sensational distraction, they remain remarkably constant.
Which leaves you with a thought I really want you to chew on today. We looked at an era equipped with brilliant scientific minds and best-selling political satire, and we saw them fall completely hook, line, and sinker for a hoax about a woman giving birth to a litter of rabbits.
It's a humbling thought.
It really is. So you have to ask yourself, Does our modern ultra-advanced internet age actually make us any less susceptible to collective delusion? Or did 1726 just lay the blueprints for exactly how we consume viral information today? Maybe, just like those 11 days missing from the calendar back then, we're still just struggling to get everyone on the exact same page. What if I told you that companies who are, aggressively adopting artificial intelligence right now aren't actually causing mass layoffs, but are instead paying their employees significantly higher wages?
I mean, it completely upends the narrative you see every time you open a news app. Right now, we are constantly ping-ponging between uh, tech CEOs promising this utopian work-free future on one side, and then on the other side, the doom-scrolling anxiety that algorithms are going to vaporize every single job on the planet.
Yeah, trying to measure the actual impact of AI by just reading headlines is like trying to measure the speed of a moving car while looking through a funhouse mirror. The distortion is just everywhere.
Exactly. You really can't trust what you're seeing at a glance.
Which is why today we are smashing the funhouse mirror. We're ditching the tech bro hype and the apocalyptic predictions to look at hard causal data. Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got our hands on an incredibly detailed, fascinating working paper from January 2026.
And it's a heavyweight paper, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's published jointly by the European Investment Bank and the Bank for International Settlements. It's titled AI Adoption, Productivity, and Employment: Evidence from European Firms.
And the mission for our analysis today is what makes this specific paper so incredibly valuable for you listening. Because instead of relying on macroeconomic guesswork or, watching isolated laboratory experiments where people type prompts in a total vacuum.
Which we see all the time.
Right, all the time. Instead of that, we're going to unpack what happens when real non-financial companies adopt AI. We're talking about a massive real-world data set here. It's the EIB survey, which covers 12,000 European firms and 800 U.S. firms.
So we are looking at real businesses with real payrolls, real supply chains, and, real quarterly targets.
Precisely. Do they fire people? Do they suddenly become hyperproductive overnight? Our objective today is to uncover the firm-level economic impact of AI in Europe right now. Not in some theoretical 10 years, but what is happening in the global economy today.
Okay, so before we can analyze how AI is changing these companies, I feel like we have to look at who actually has their hands on the technology, because the prevailing narrative is always that the United States is just, eating Europe's lunch when it comes to the tech sector.
And if you stop at the raw innovation data, that narrative holds up perfectly. The paper confirms a massive baseline gap. I mean, the European Union is heavily trailing the U.S. in AI-related patents.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and that gap didn't just appear overnight. It widened significantly after the pandemic. The U.S. just has a much stronger specialization in AI innovation.
But, and I think this is key, creating the technology and actually deploying the technology inside a business are two very different things.
Oh, totally different. When we look at deployment, the firms actually putting these AI models to work, it becomes a heavily nuanced story. On average, adoption levels between the US and the EU are somewhat similar, but there's this immense internal variation within Europe.
Based strictly on financial development, right?
Exactly. The data shows that highly financially developed EU countries are actually matching, or in some cases beating, the U.S. average. So the U.S. adoption rate is sitting at about 34%.
Okay.
But look at Sweden. They're up at 52% adoption.
Wow. 52%. That's a huge jump.
It is. But then the stark contrast appears when you move to less financially developed EU countries. A country like Romania, for example, is lagging significantly at around 22%.
So it's about the environment.
Right. The environment a firm operates in the depth of its local financial markets, its ability to secure capital for major technological investments that dictates whether it can even step onto the playing field.
Well, and it's not just geography either.
Yeah.
The sector breakdown in this data had some genuine surprises for me. I mean, the obvious players are leading the pack, of course.
Yeah.
The information communications technology sector, the big pharma companies.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
But then you look at food manufacturing, and it shows incredibly high, above average AI uptake. Meanwhile, accommodation and food services like hotels, local restaurants, they're trailing way behind.
It really raises an important question about structural readiness. Why would a company making frozen pizzas be so far ahead of a massive hotel chain in adopting cutting-edge algorithms?
Well, let's visualize that for a second. Think about a massive frozen pizza factory. They operate with incredibly complex, highly structured supply chains.
Right, massive scale.
Yeah, they track exactly how many tons of flour arrive at the loading dock, the minute-by-minute temperature of the industrial ovens, the GPS logistics of a fleet of freezer trucks. They inherently generate massive data sets.
Data sets that are perfectly formatted to be fed into an AI for predictive analytics or supply chain optimization.
Exactly. But then think about your local bed and breakfast, or even a mid-sized boutique hotel. The owner might use booking software, sure, but they don't have the vast, continuous structured data infrastructure required to make an enterprise-level AI actually useful.
No, of course not. An algorithm can't optimize handwritten guest ledgers or just disjointed spreadsheets on a desktop computer.
Right, so sectors like manufacturing have incredibly clear use cases for automation, and crucially, they already have the technical architecture in place.
Which is a perfect segue, because knowing that rich, tech-savvy firms with lots of data are using AI leads us right into a classic data trap. It's known as the endogeneity problem.
Okay, the endogeneity problem, break that down for us.
Basically, if we see that these rich, tech-savvy firms are using AI, and we also see that those same firms are highly productive, how do we separate the variables?
Like the chicken or the egg.
Exactly. Are they productive because they integrated AI into their workflows? Or did they just buy the AI because they were already well-managed, highly productive, and swimming in cash?
Oh, I see. Because if you just look at a basic graph of those two things, you might assume AI is this magic wand, when in reality, the company was already a powerhouse before the software was even installed.
Precisely. So to prove a causal link, to prove that the AI technology itself is creating a distinct productivity boost, these researchers had to get incredibly creative with their methodology.
Which I loved reading about.
It's so smart. They took the 12,000 European firms in their survey. Let's say one is a mid-sized German auto parts manufacturer. The researchers then scoured a separate pool of 800 U.S. firms to find an American company that matches the German firm on almost every conceivable metric.
Wait, like an exact match? Size, sector, that sort of thing?
Everything. Size, sector, investment intensity, innovation activity, management structure, even how they finance their debt.
So wait, are you saying they basically went looking for a company's multiverse variant?
That is, honestly, that's a brilliant way to picture it. An identical twin operating in a totally different universe.
Okay, but why does finding an American multiverse twin help us understand the productivity of a German factory? Like, how does that solve the data trap?
Because the U.S. firm operates in a completely different institutional and policy environment. The researchers took the American firm's AI adoption behavior and assigned it to the European firm as a proxy.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah, by doing that, they strip away all the local, unobserved European biases. They filter out things like, say, a specific local tech subsidy in Berlin or a uniquely European managerial culture. They isolate the raw power of the tech itself, completely untainted by local variables.
That's just brilliant data science. So when they ran this multiverse methodology and they finally got past the correlation, what was the real causal number they found?
The study proves that AI adoption increases labor productivity at the firm level by 4%.
4%.
4%.
Okay, I have to push back slightly on that number.
Yeah.
Because 4% feels incredibly low when you look at the media landscape. We've got tech CEOs out there promising that AI is going to double or triple human productivity.
Oh, absolutely.
They're selling us on 100%, 200% gains. And the hard causal data comes back at a single-digit 4%. I mean, why should anyone care about a 4% bump?
Well, we should care precisely because it is realistic. It's grounded in firm-level reality rather than a sales pitch. If we connect this to the bigger picture, many macroeconomic models have warned that overall aggregate growth from AI might actually be virtually invisible, less than 0.1% annually, due to the immense friction of implementing new technology across an entire economy.
Oh, sure. Friction is huge.
Yeah.
But on the other extreme, you have lab experiments showing people writing code or drafting emails 40% faster using a chatbot.
Exactly. The single individual using a chatbot to write a memo is phenomenally faster. But that individual task efficiency doesn't seamlessly translate to a 10,000-person company's bottom line.
Right, because organizations are full of friction.
Yes. Enterprise software takes months to integrate safely. Entire departmental workflows have to be redesigned. Legal compliance has to be verified.
Right. It's not just flicking a switch.
No, not at all. So a 4% causal increase in overall labor productivity at the firm level is actually massive when applied across thousands of companies. It aligns with the most credible mid-range macroeconomic projections. It's not a utopian productivity boom where everyone works 2 days a week, but it is a very real, very significant competitive advantage for the businesses that figure it out.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the people actually working at these companies? If a firm's productivity goes up 4%, I feel like the immediate anxiety for anyone listening to this is that the firm achieved that 4% by firing 4% of its staff.
It's the most logical fear to have.
Right. You automate the tasks, you cut the payroll, and the productivity per remaining worker artificially goes up.
But this brings us to one of the most comforting findings in the entire paper. The data shows absolutely no evidence of adverse effects on firm-level employment in the short run.
Wait, really? No job losses?
None in the short run. Adopting AI did not lead to these companies shedding jobs. Instead, the researchers attribute this 4% productivity gain to a mechanism called capital deepening.
Capital deepening. Okay, explain that for us.
Capital deepening occurs when a company gives its existing workers better, more advanced tools. This increases the output of each individual worker without reducing the total headcount. The AI is augmenting their cognitive tasks, not replacing the human executing them.
I love that. Here's a real-world way to visualize capital deepening for everyone. Imagine a construction worker who has spent their whole career digging building foundations with a hand trowel. It takes them weeks to finish a single job.
Sure.
One day, the boss shows up and hands them the keys to a brand new, massive hydraulic excavator. The boss doesn't fire the worker, right? The boss still desperately needs a human to operate the machine safely. But suddenly, that single worker is moving 100 times more dirt in a single afternoon. You augment the worker, you don't replace them.
That's a perfect analogy. The AI is essentially the excavator for modern cognitive work. It handles the repetitive, heavy lifting, sorting through massive spreadsheets, drafting standard legal boilerplate, scanning thousands of lines of code for basic bugs.
Stuff that takes humans hours.
Exactly. And the human worker is now operating the machine. They're reviewing the output, checking for hallucinations, and making higher-level strategic decisions based on that process information. And because the worker is now dramatically more productive, the data reveals a surprising secondary effect.
The wage bump. I mentioned this at the very beginning.
Yes. The researchers found that workers in AI-adopting firms are actually earning higher wages right now compared to their peers in non-adopting firms. The companies are sharing the productivity dividend with the augmented workforce.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. We really need to look at the timeline of this survey. We're looking at data collected between 2019 and 2024.
Right, a 5-year window.
5 years. The excavator is brand new. Are we just in the honeymoon phase here? I mean, is it possible that right now, companies need the workers to train the AI and verify its outputs, but once the AI is fully integrated and the models can execute multi-step workflows entirely independently, do the robots actually come for the jobs then?
That is a vital caveat, and to be fair, the paper explicitly notes it. While there are no short-run adverse effects on employment, the longer-term effects remain highly uncertain. We are currently in an adoption and integration phase.
A transitional period.
Exactly. Right now, the complementarity between the human and the AI is incredibly strong. But 10 years from now, as the technology matures from an assistant into an autonomous agent, the employment dynamics could absolutely shift.
Which makes right now a critical window for both workers and companies to secure their footing. Because even if jobs aren't disappearing today, the data reveals a massive catch.
A very big catch.
Yeah. If this 4% productivity bump is a golden ticket, we need to look closely at who is actually getting to cash it in.
This is where the tone of the paper shifts from optimistic to highly cautionary. The distributional effects, meaning how these benefits are spread out across the economy, they are alarming.
The adoption is highly stratified. Let's look at the firm sizes in the data. 45% of large firms, meaning those with over 250 employees, are actively using AI.
Right.
But when you look at small firms with 10 to 49 employees, only 24% are using it.
This brings us right back to your pizza factory versus the local bed and breakfast analogy. The productivity benefits of AI are concentrating heavily in medium and large firms. They have the financial scale to absorb the massive integration costs. They already have the structured data.
And because they are receiving this 4% compound advantage year over year, there's a severe risk of widening income and corporate inequality. The gap between the mega corporation and the local business is just going to accelerate.
Because the productivity dividend isn't magic, it requires serious capital. The researchers measured what happens when companies make complementary investments alongside their AI adoption. If a company invests an extra percentage point of their budget into software and data infrastructure, it boosts the baseline AI productivity effect by 2.4%.
You need better digital pipes for the data to flow through. That makes logical sense.
It does. But here is the most important statistic in the entire study, and it has absolutely nothing to do with software.
Okay, lay it on us.
Investing an extra percentage point in employee training boosts the AI productivity effect by an incredible 5.9%.
Wow, 5.9%. That is more than double the return of just buying better software or faster servers.
Exactly. The most advanced algorithm on Earth is completely useless if your workforce doesn't know how to wield it safely and effectively. The paper specifically calls for workforce reskilling in what they term fusion skills.
Fusion skills. I like that term. Fusing the human judgment with the machine's brute force. The paper highlights 3 specific areas for this, right?
Sure.
Prompt engineering, data stewardship, and human-in-the-loop decision-making.
Yes. Let's look at what the absence of those fusion skills actually looks like on the ground, just to understand why that 5.9% boost exists.
Let's do it.
Imagine 2 logistics managers at competing firms. Worker A does not have fusion skills. They're handed a massive new AI optimization tool, and they simply type in, "Optimize my delivery routes for the lowest fuel cost."
Seems reasonable.
Sure. And the AI spits out a route that is highly fuel efficient, but completely ignores local municipal noise ordinances for night deliveries.
Oh, no.
Worker A implements the route blindly because the computer told them it was mathematically optimal. A week later, the company is hit with tens of thousands of dollars in fines, and their trucks are impounded.
They bought the software, but they didn't have the skills to use it safely.
Exactly. Now look at worker B, who has been trained in fusion skills. They understand data stewardship. They know the AI model doesn't automatically factor in local municipal laws unless it is explicitly fed that specific legal data set.
Right, they know the limits of the data.
They use prompt engineering to set strict operational constraints before ever asking for a route. And crucially, they utilize human-in-the-loop decision-making. When the AI suggests a highly unusual route, worker B evaluates it against real-world context before hitting approve.
The human judgment factor.
Exactly. Worker B completes in 10 minutes what used to take 3 days and does it flawlessly. That is why training delivers a 5.9% productivity boost. The AI isn't doing the work. Worker B is using the AI to do perfect work.
But this terrifies me for the small business owner listening to this. If I run a company with 20 employees, I'm already trailing the big corporations in AI adoption because I don't have their massive data infrastructure. Now, the data is telling me that to get the real benefit, to keep up with that 4% compound growth, I don't just need to buy expensive software licenses. I need the budget to run continuous high-level fusion skill training programs for my entire staff. I mean, does this data mean the small business is just fundamentally locked out of the next economic era?
That is the immense structural divergence the global economy is facing right now, particularly in Europe, which has an industrial landscape heavily dominated by small and medium enterprises. If the returns on artificial intelligence are structurally biased toward massive companies who can afford the complementary investments in training and data architecture,
Then what happens?
we are going to see a severe hollowing out of the mid-market. The paper stresses that public policy has to step in to prevent this.
By subsidizing the cost of the technology, like handing out grants for software.
Subsidizing software licenses or computer chips isn't enough, as the data proves. The policy must heavily incentivize firm-level investment in human capital. We need coordinated public investments in vocational training and lifelong learning programs. We have to build an infrastructure where the workforce of smaller firms can develop those fusion skills without bankrupting the small business owner.
We have covered an enormous amount of ground today, so let's synthesize this journey for you, the listener. We started by cutting through the utopian hype and the doom scrolling to look at the real-world deployment of AI. We saw that while the EU trails in patents, highly developed financial markets actually allow deployment to keep pace with the US.
And we explored the ingenious multiverse methodology, where researchers found American corporate twins to strip away local biases, proving that AI doesn't just correlate with success, it actually causes a firm 4% increase in labor productivity.
Right. We tackled the immediate human cost, learning that right now, AI is acting as a cognitive excavator, not a grim reaper for your job. It's driving capital deepening, maintaining headcounts, and even pushing wages higher for the workers who are augmented by the technology.
But we also hit the harsh systemic reality. This is currently a rich company's game. It's a massive productivity multiplier for large firms that already have the resources to buy the tech and, most importantly, to heavily train their people in vital fusion skills.
The dividing line of the next decade is coming into sharp focus, which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to ponder. We've seen the hard data. We know that right now, only the medium and large companies have the financial architecture to truly harness this technology.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. If AI structurally rewards massive scale, if it makes the big guys vastly more efficient, while small businesses are priced out of the necessary data integration and fusion training, are we accelerating toward an economy entirely dominated by megacorporations? Could the sheer cost of safely optimizing AI inadvertently kill off the local independent business model entirely?
It is arguably the defining economic challenge of our time.
So look around your own workplace this week. Are your leaders just buying software licenses and hoping for the best, or are they actively investing in your fusion skills? Because the data clearly shows that in 5 years, the massive economic divide won't just be between megacorporations and small businesses. It will be between the workers who were taught how to drive the excavator and the ones still holding the hand trowel. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.